3,479 days ago, Star Wars The Force Awakens released in theaters. I remember going there. I remember sitting in a theater and watching the reboot of the films that I had never had the memory of, the franchise that I've never had the memory of watching in theaters. Clearly, I wasn't old enough for the 80s and 90s, and I wasn't really old enough to remember the 2000s. So going to the theater to watch the reboot, the continuation of the Star Wars story, it was a massive thing in 2015. It was the theater was packed, and I think everyone left with a pretty good um, feeling about the movie, The Force Awakens. They were interested in the Rey story. They liked BB-8. BB-8 was huge. BB-8 was huge, and I feel like they did their job in the first movie. They accomplished their goal, and they had a successful reboot. And then they come in, and what they did was they did 1 year of the Star Wars, and then they would do like the some alternate story. So it was Rogue One, Force Awakens, Rogue One, Episode 8, Han Solo movie, and then Episode 9. And somewhere along there, it feels like Rogue One screwed everything up, kind of. Rogue One, I feel like a lot of people had some resentment towards it. I felt like Rogue One is probably the best movie that came out of that era of films. Um, I felt it was very heartfelt. It kind of it allows for Andor to be made, which is now a very successful, like probably the most successful Star Wars show that has come out of all that. I've maybe probably Boba Fett and not Boba Fett, but the Mandalorian is probably the most successful. Grogu kind of carries that show, but from a media standpoint, I feel like the best show is probably Andor. I think that's what like hardcore fans are probably the most um, you know encouraged by. Like that was a success, the most successful in their eyes. The real fans. So as we go on, uh, I've there's been this like debate in my mind of whether the sequels will get the prequel treatment. Where early on they were hated. They were hated pretty substantially. Nobody really liked them, and they didn't like Jar Jar Binks, and I feel like even like the younger Anakin kind of storyline isn't real great. It's not really needed. You can kind of cut out what most of Episode One. Uh, the pod racing scene, I don't feel like has any real impact on a lot of people. And really, you're just watching for um, Anakin to become Darth Vader. I think that's probably like most of the OG Star Wars fans. That's what they wanted to see. But they introduced the Clone Wars, which I mean, that has its own like separate fan base and was very successful on its own. So, but I don't really see them, and I think that kind of the Clone Wars is kind of what I think saved the prequel trilogy. It was it was okay. They were okay movies. A lot of this like distasteful takes came out of it, whatever. But they had the Clone Wars, and that allowed them to make the animated show. That allowed them to like get this new audience that was like super excited for the Clone Wars. Because I mean the clones are and the clone and the Clone Wars are probably like some of the best story wise parts of the Star Wars universe. I feel like it's Luke Skywalker in the originals, not Luke Skywalker in the sequel. Luke Skywalker, that story is like number one, like very well written character, and a very well written story. And then number two, the after Luke Skywalker, it is the Clone Wars. I mean, the Clone Wars is a very like interesting idea. It's a very interesting concept. It's, cool. It's like using it's modern war, but like that doesn't have to be like uh dirtied with uh the typical stereotypical war movie stuff. Like they're clones. They're gonna be clones. They're fighting droids, which is also very cool, and really just saves a lot of the sequel. And I think is what helped the sequels get over the initial disdain for them was the introduction of the Clone Wars and things like that. So we're now today that the prequels are pretty well received by most of the audience, and a lot of that is the final act in Episode 3, with the Obi-Wan and Anakin fight. I feel like that's a very monumental part of a lot of the Star Wars fans at the time's, general consensus is like this is a very cool fight, and a lot of edits can come out of that because it's so like iconic. But I really don't see that in the sequels. There's not really an iconic moment, I feel like, that really happens in the sequels. And they really haven't introduced any new concepts, really. I mean, it's the First Order was introduced, which is just the Empire. I mean, it's a one-to-one for the Empire. And so you can't really expand off that. And then you took your First Order soldier that defected and joined the rebellion, and you just made him nothing. You didn't do anything with him. He went and gambled on this planet, and then whatever else, and maybe he had the Force, but no, he doesn't have the Force. And then you're like, I don't know. It's like the sequel makers eventually were like, let's just copy one for one the Star Wars. Like, oh, we're gonna have a final fight, and then they're gonna beat the evil big guy, which is really just Emperor Palpatine again, and because they were cloning Snoke in a bottle. So I mean that destroys, where did Snoke come from? That destroys a whole line of whatever. Oh, he was built in a tube. So that maybe a story about that's gone, or something that you can theorize on, or whatever else you want to do. So that's gone. And then Kylo Ren, oh, he dies, and he dies because he helps Rey, like Darth Vader helped Luke, but Rey lives and Luke lives. So, and then she's like, oh, I'm a Skywalker actually. So it's like the Skywalker name lives on. And so, I mean, so it's not really the last Skywalker, but in a way, she is not a Skywalker and whatever else. So I feel like you can't make another story about Rey. So that's gone. That's off the table. And then with the stuff that they want to do before, like, oh, Han Solo, he's this great character, and people probably want to know how he came along to be. And then you make the movie, and that movie was very poorly received because you just make weird decisions like, oh, Han Solo, your last name's Solo because you're all alone and you're solo. It's like, come on, what are we doing? What are we doing with this? So that kind of, that even muddies the water going, like, you watch the Han Solo movie, it's like, okay, that's kind of lame. He kind of cheesed the Kessler Run or whatever. He cheesed it. Oh, he's named Solo because he was solo. Kind of just lame stuff. And then you go into the episode 9, and you're like, man, I really didn't like the Han Solo movie, but now I got to watch the episode 9, and then they mess it up too. And so it's like, where are we trying to do? What are we trying to do to gain new fans off of these new interesting concepts? when we're not introducing any new concepts. The first order is just gonna be Empire. It's really still just the Skywalkers that we have. There's no new, we're gonna kill off Han Solo. We're gonna Chewbacca's gonna still be here because he lives forever, and we're just not gonna introduce anything new. There's a whole lot of things that we can do. We're just not gonna introduce anything new to this franchise, and we're not gonna come up with anything to you know emphasize or want to attract these new fans that are like, I'm not really vibing with this story that we got going on here. But we're not going to introduce any new cool concepts like a Clone War or whatever else. Like just making another story about Jedis. Jedis are cool, but you can't just keep making stories about different Jedis that fleed things. Like that's what part of the Clone Wars is cool. It's like it's Star Wars, but it's not just Jedis. It's another entity of themselves. It's something else that's cool, and that's what the new sequels needed. I feel like to be successful, or to at least like gain some recognition in the Star Wars community, is picking up some new like one-off line, like Obi-Wan saying, "Oh, I fought with your father in the Clone Wars." They come up with a Clone Wars, and it's like this really cool thing that has a lot of intricate policies, and it's Order 66 and all this other stuff that allows this very interesting and extensive shows to be created off of this like one-liner that I don't know if George Lucas, I haven't read anything about that, but I don't know if George Lucas like already knew what the Clone Wars were when he was making the first movie. I'm sure he didn't. But that's just something that's interesting. And you're just not really creating anything. You did it a little bit with the Mandalorians. You're like, oh, the city of Mandalore, or the planet of Mandalore, we're gonna have the Mandalorians. You did that with the show, and it was widely popular. The Mandalorians were widely popular. The Mandalorian show, and Grogu, oh, Yoda, like it was very successful in the public's eyes. Like that was the belle of the ball for the sequel movement, the sequel franchise at least, and you didn't really do anything else like that. And you can't just it's one guy. The Mandalorian, you can't do like a whole nother thing about Mandalorians. It's like, oh, I already watched that show. So you just kind of lose a lot of people. And that wasn't, the Mandalorians weren't ever discussed in the movies. So you can't, like, when making movies and trying to then gain some fans to watch these shows that you have on your streaming platforms, you want to like draw interest from the movies, because people like going to movies more than they like going on a streaming service and watching a show, or they expect more out of these movies because it's kind of a royalty, of watching these movies. It's so when you don't like when the best thing that came out of your saga era, whatever you want to call it, of movies wasn't ever discussed in the movies. It was just the Mandalorians because Boba Fett's cool, and then you make Boba Fett, and then you make Boba Fett not cool really because you have like lame fights and riding space cruisers that look lame and they're steampunk for some reason. It's like, what are we doing? What are we doing, guys? Y'all had it. Y'all had the Mandalorians. Y'all had people excited for episode 7 of the sequels, and you messed it up. So I don't think that this wide new regard of the sequel trilogy is gonna happen like it did for the prequels. Like nowadays, I think the people that grew up watching the original Star Wars, they're like, the prequels are trash, and maybe they like the sequels a little bit better because like it has Luke Skywalker, and that's all they really cared about was Luke Skywalker. And then the prequels don't really have Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, Leia. They have all them. And then, but like the fans that grew up with this one, the middle, or not the middle, the prequels, they they like it like up like probably not as much as the original Star Wars, but there's a growing interest, and like a lot of people like the prequels that you know watched it when they were like 20 or whatever. Like there's a significant amount of people that like the trilogy movies, and I don't think that's gonna happen with the sequels. Over time, they're gonna be like come around to it. I think the sequels together genuinely be regarded as not that great. Because I mean, no one's gonna really want to watch them. I have never. I don't think I've ever thought about rewatching one of the sequel trilogies. I don't want to watch what's in them, you know. But I've rewatched the prequels and the originals, you know, and so that's what I think is the real problem for the sequel trilogy. So that's all I got. That's all I got. But I mean, they had it. That's what I'm trying to, you know, if they had like another, you know, galaxy bending ability, like a story, you know, part of the story that was the Clone Wars to introduce in the sequels, instead of just having your show and all your stuff be for like a replication of the originals, and then have the Mandalorian uh spin off, or not spin off, but show that was widely successful. Everybody was watching the Mandalorian. Everyone was talking about Baby Yoda. It was crazy popular, crazy successful, and they couldn't capitalize on it because it's at the end of the day, it's just a story about one guy, and it's a TV show. um so and it won't bring, you know, even if you watch it, the Mandalorian, the people aren't going to want to watch the movies based off the Mandalorian like they would the Clone Wars. If you watch the Clone Wars show, then you're like, oh, I want to go watch the prequels again, you know, because you're in the Clone Wars is so interesting. That's my point. That's why I'll stop yapping. That's my point, though. Thank you. Subscribe. Probably not many of you made it all the way through. 17 minutes and 21 seconds here. I'm getting on my count, but thank you. Thank you for listening. Leave a comment down below. Thank you.